and welcome to the Supporting Homeschool Families webinar. My name is Beth Yates. I'm the Children's Consultant at the Indiana State Library in our Professional Development Office, and I will be your host for this webinar. Our presenters are Suzanne Walker. She's the librarian in the State Library's Indiana Young Readers Center, and Shelby Peak, who is a children's librarian at the Indianapolis Public Library. Before we get started, since this webinar is pre-recorded, I just wanted to say a quick note about library education units, aka LEUs. For Indiana staff who may be watching this, the webinar is worth one LEU, and ISL's policy states that if you watch a recording of a webinar, you'll need to have an administrator or someone in HR at your library create an LEU certificate for you, because they're the ones who can verify that you watched the webinar. So if you have any questions, you can contact me. My name again is Beth Yates, and my email address is byates@library.in.gov. So, okay, let's get into this webinar, and Shelby and Suzanne, you can take it away.
Okay, hi everybody. To start things off, I am Shelby Peak. As Beth said earlier, I work for the Indianapolis Public Library as a children's librarian for the Franklin Road branch. And I'm also a member of IndyPL's Homeschool Services Committee, where I work with other staff in our system on various homeschool service initiatives. I'm also a homeschool alum. I was homeschooled in the state of Florida for kindergarten all the way until I graduated high school. So it's really nice for me to be able to have that personal connection with our homeschool patrons.
Hi, everybody. I'm Suzanne Walker. I work at the Indiana State Library as the Indiana Young Readers Center librarian. I used to work with homeschoolers quite a bit when I was the youth librarian at the Mooresville Public Library in Indiana, and I currently serve with Shelby on the Indianapolis Public Library's Homeschool Committee. You can see our contact information there on the slide. We will put that back up again at the end of the webinar. You guys can feel free to contact Shelby or I if you have any questions about any of this. So Shelby and I do have a lot to cover today. The bulk of our presentation will be about things that you all as librarians can do right now to support your families who are learning at home, whether due to the pandemic, which we all know about, or because they are traditional homeschoolers. However, before we get into all of our ideas for you, and trust me, we have a lot, we are going to take a few minutes to discuss what homeschooling looks like right now. So there's going to be hybrids of all of these, but I'm seeing three main buckets that homeschoolers can fall into. So in our first bucket, we have remote learning or e-learning. So this is where the student is still enrolled in their traditional school. Their school may have gone to 100% remote learning, or they may be doing a hybrid where the student is in the brick and mortar building maybe 2 to 3 days a week and is e-learning or even learning through mailed packets or doing some other kind of project on the other days of the week. In remote learning, the school is choosing the subjects and the curriculum that will be covered. And in this scenario, the school and the parent are really partnering together and sharing the responsibility to ensure that the child is getting an education. I mean, that's like the best case scenario is that both the parent and the teacher are really involved. Also, this option is temporary, we hope, and it's most likely due to the pandemic. In our second bucket, we have parents who've decided to enroll their students in an online-only school. They may have withdrawn their students from a traditional brick and mortar school because of the pandemic, or they may have been attending an online-only school for some time now. Want you to be aware that there are several public charter schools in Indiana that require no tuition, and there are several private online schools as well that do require tuition. So there's both kind of options. And in this scenario, the student is still doing e-learning, but not through a traditional brick and mortar school in their community. This type of school is usually 100% online. And in this scenario, the school and the parent, again, have that partnership to make sure that the child is getting an education. And in our last bucket, we have our traditional homeschooling families, and this is what Shelby's going to talk to you guys more about. So these folks were probably homeschooling before the pandemic, they've been homeschooling during the pandemic, and they're going to be homeschooling after the pandemic. We also might have families right now that are new to traditional homeschooling that have chosen to withdraw their students from their brick and mortar schools because of the pandemic, and they're starting traditional homeschooling for the very first time. So in traditional homeschooling, the parents are choosing the subjects and the curriculum, they are tracking the students' progress, and in the end, the parents are the sole entity that are responsible for making sure that their child is getting an education. There could be other options out there or hybrids of all three of those approaches. I think for sure that this year we're definitely going to have some creative and unique ways that parents are choosing to educate their children. But in any case, our public libraries that we work in can help support each of these options. And Shelby and I hope to give you lots of ideas about how that can happen. So we're going to go ahead and begin at the beginning. Parents might have questions about getting started with any of these approaches. I think it's really helpful for us as librarians to be aware of the basics so that we can help parents set out on the right path for them. So we're going to give you a brief overview of how to start all three of these options, including some links. And don't worry, we will upload these slides with this recording, so you won't have to write any of these links down. So to get started, we're going to talk about remote learning or e-learning. And don't worry, we're definitely going to get to traditional homeschooling. So there's not a huge barrier to entry in getting started with remote learning through a brick and mortar school. Students using this route are probably already enrolled in their community schools. Families are really just making a choice based on the options that the school has created. So for families doing remote learning, parents need to be really familiar with their school's plans. In some cases, they will need to make a choice between going 100% remote learning or some other kind of hybrid approach. And it will be worth it for you as a local librarian to become really familiar with the school plans in your area as well, so that you can anticipate some of the issues that might be facing parents. Be sure to check for updates on these plans because they can change, and they have changed very frequently through the course of the beginning of this 2020 school year, which I'm sure you guys have already seen. In many cases, elementary schools might have a different plan from middle schools, which might have different plans from high schools, so be aware of that as well. Take a look at their policies regarding extracurricular activities. Those might be opportunities for the public library to reach the community during this time when so many of us are unable to connect with our patrons. So the first thing I would want you guys to do is read your school's plans. Along with familiarizing yourself with the back to school plans at your local school systems, also see if the schools are offering any kind of support programs. Is there food service available even while they are doing remote learning? Are there services available for school or for students with special needs? Does the school offer referrals to social services? Sometimes this type of information is available at the district level on their website. And knowing what the schools offer will be really helpful when parents come to you with various needs, because you might be able to refer them right back to the school. Something else to be aware of, and I think this is extremely important, is the internet coverage in your area. Connectivity is really huge and important right now. On the resource slide, I'm going to provide you with a couple of links where you can go in and see a little bit about the internet coverage in your area. If you are in a remote area that doesn't have a lot of broadband or even data service available, you may be spending a lot of time and a lot of your resources trying to boost the Wi-Fi in your building or providing hotspots that can be used in places where data is present. If parents need access to the internet and it's not available to them, they might even be wanting to spend time in your building using your Wi-Fi. And we'll talk more about that in a little bit. Okay, so getting into some services that public libraries can provide. Remote learning families have a lot of challenges, but many of these challenges can actually be opportunities for libraries to step in and help. One of the hardest things I think that parents are going to have to figure out is balancing their childcare schedules with their work schedules. They may be looking to the library to provide their child a place to work on a computer all day long. They might be hoping to check out a study room for weeks at a time. I don't think that this is something that public libraries can single-handedly fix. So be sure that you know what your library will do about requests like that. Revisit your policies for unattended children, see if you're making any updates in regards to COVID. Check on your meeting room schedule and your meeting room policies and your studying room policies. And as far as this goes, perhaps you could facilitate some kind of community conversation about this challenge. This is something that is going to affect everybody. You guys might as well be talking about to see what you guys can do. Another challenge parents who are doing remote learning might have is meal planning, either from a budgeting perspective or just a parent who doesn't want to be providing snacks all the livelong day. Dealing with food while kids are in the house for long stretches can be a real pain. So be sure you know about the services in your community that offer food assistance. This also might be a great topic for a virtual program. You could do a whole series. I think this would be a great idea. You could do a whole series of virtual programs to support parents right now who are doing home learning this year. And one of the topics that you could cover might be developing a good routine for the at-home school day, including what snacks are available, what food is off limits during the day, and what healthy habits parents might want to try to instill in their kids during this time. You know, like breaking up the day by taking a walk. I know a lot of you probably saw this schedule back in April. This was sort of held up as the unattainable gold standard at the beginning of the pandemic. So your library could actually provide a virtual program or a Zoom conversation about how parents can develop these kinds of structured schedules, because if they don't, they could end up with something that looks more like this. And this is also something you guys may have seen. And in this example, you know, the kids go through two weeks of food in one day. So another challenge for remote learners will be devices. I don't have a ton of solutions for these. I feel like most libraries aren't really circulating laptops or tablets for at-home use, but if you are, be sure that your program is ready to go. Another thing all public libraries can do is, again, look at your school's plans for reopening and for details about their devices. Are the schools providing devices to all the students? What kind of devices are your schools putting out into your community? So make sure that you're familiar with those devices, or at least know some good videos or resources that you can refer to if people call the library with issues related to their devices. Because I like to be a green librarian, I want to mention that refurbished devices are also available for a fraction of the cost of a new device, and those are better for the environment. So you might familiarize yourself with options for refurbished devices in your area if your patron is looking to purchase something. So we talked about connectivity a little bit already. Some libraries are getting really creative in providing more internet to their communities. Some are installing extra routers around their communities. They're bringing Wi-Fi to patrons via bookmobiles. They're boosting their wireless signals and extending the hours that their Wi-Fi is available, like in the parking lot. And as youth librarians, it might not be our responsibility to provide the answers to this problem, but we can take ideas to our directors and at least ask questions about what is being done in our community to strengthen internet access right now. Because as we all know, it's super important. Something else that is concerning for parents right now is the lack of social opportunities for kids. And many of you guys are having virtual programs, and I want right now, and that's really important. And I want to encourage you guys to try to do programs where the kids and the teens get time to talk to each other or to play a game online. There's lots of good Zoom games ideas out there. I really have loved all the virtual story times that I've seen. And I know that we at the State Library, we've been premiering videos and letting people interact in the chat box, but kids are really missing their peers. So see if you can get a program going where the youth can actually interact with each other within the safe space of that program. And still on programs, I know that a few libraries have started sort of tiptoeing back to doing face-to-face programming again, especially if you have outdoor space available. I'm not going to take a lot of time to talk about this other than to say that you need to take several things into account before doing face-to-face programs in a post-COVID world. And a lot of this will depend on when you're actually watching this webinar. So first of all, you need space. You need a lot of space, preferably outdoors. That might not be available, but outdoor space is the best. You need to have registration for contact tracing purposes, and you need to limit the number of registrants. You need to require face masks for anybody over the age of 2. And again, this is all depending on when you're watching this. You also need to have a way to delineate space for each participant, whether that's making a giant grid on the ground with masking tape or spacing out hula hoops on the ground, spacing out yoga mats for everyone, yoga mats. Just make sure that each participant knows what space belongs to them. You know, like in Dirty Dancing, this is my dancing space, this is your dancing space. You want to make sure everybody knows what their space is. Keep those face-to-face programs short right now. Some things you could do at a program like this might be guided meditation. You could do with kids, you could do a book discussion. You could do a simple directed drawing program. You could do anything sort of like campfire activities. For example, you could write a story where each child submits like 2 words and you go around the circle and you make a wacky story that way. And actually, you could do that over Zoom too. That might be a fun thing to do over Zoom. Anyway, so there are programs that you can do that are like this. And I've even heard of story times being done this way. But your biggest consideration before you start thinking about face-to-face programs will probably be getting them approved by your administration before you do any planning. So that's really enough about that. Okay, so moving on to the last challenge in our chart, and I'm sure that there are many others that we're not covering. Parents are having to find places for their kids to do their schoolwork in their houses and their apartments. And again, you want to make sure that your library's policies for visiting right now are clear. Make sure you know what they are. How long can patrons stay? Can the same patron reserve a study room for all day? But other than that, maybe there is some guidance that your library can offer. I could see a really fun virtual program about setting up cheap and easy workspaces for kids. You could talk about cheap furniture available like card tables, or you could even do a DIY virtual program on how to make something like these. Super cute. They just require a box and probably some tape. And I've also seen these with pockets on the sides. We all like pockets on the sides. And a quick Pinterest search provides lots of budget-friendly ideas for desks for kids. I mean, I know it's going to be a challenge finding a conducive working/learning space for every single person in your family. Back to school right now is not the same as it has been in the past, but maybe you can help parents kind of carve out some space for their kids and have fun at the same time. This slide is sort of my batting cleanup slide. There are just a few more ideas of how libraries can support home learners. I mentioned already the idea of doing a series of virtual programs to support all at-home learners, whether they're traditional homeschoolers or remote learners. A series like that might be really popular right now. Also, keep in mind that masks are still needed. Do you have volunteers that can sew child-sized masks for students who are going to school half the time and staying at home half the time? Also, think about your reader's advisory. What kind of reader's advisory are you doing for parents? Make sure that your reader's advisory work is updated with new and diverse titles because parents might want ideas for recreational reading right now. And put some stuff up on your website about this because we know not very many people are physically coming into the library right now. Parents may also be looking for self-directed learning ideas or websites for their students, things that are educational that kids can explore on their own. And I have a slide of ideas about that I'll share here in a second. And then again, parents might also be looking for things for their kids to do that do not involve screens. So see if you can put together a fun blog post or a fun list of things that kids can do like sidewalk chalk or taking a walk or drawing to music or writing a story about their favorite toy, doing a craft, doing a science project, making a meal. Is there a fun way that you could package all those ideas for your patrons? Maybe you could do it through an Instagram post. Okay, so here's this slide about free websites that are super cool and fun to explore. And, again, parents might just be looking for more things for their kids to do to supplement what's happening in school. And I'm not going to talk about all of these, but I am going to highlight Chrome Music Lab. Chrome Music Lab is super fun. You do have to access it through the Chrome browser, but it allows you to easily write music on your own in a simple and really pretty beautiful interface. It's just really fun to play with. And everything else on the screen is really fun as well. I also want to mention Rosetta Stone, which all Indiana residents have access to through inspire.in.gov, which I hope all of you are at least a little bit familiar with. And if not, you can pause this webinar and go take some inspire.in.gov webinars to get you going on what Inspire is. Be sure to do that. And I'm sure that you guys all have your own list of awesome websites or apps that you suggest to parents, so dust that off and get that ready. And I also, so get that ready to go. Okay. So I can't really do a presentation about learning, especially for youth, without mentioning Common Sense Media. This is a really great website that helps parents sift through all the content that's out there in the web. If you do a search on Google for the best math websites for kids, you will get about 56 million results. But if you do that same search in Common Sense Media, that number can get down to 15 of the best math sites for the age group that your patron is looking for. All of their picks have been reviewed and assessed, so you can get a little bit of peace of mind that you're doing a good referral. So this is a really great site. If you haven't taken a look at it, do get in there and check it out. So again, you can take a look at these slides later, but here are some resources to help with remote learners. There's those sites I mentioned about learning more about your connectivity in your community. There's even a link to those cute lap desks, so those links will be available to you. And lastly, this is a link to all those self-directed learning options, including Chrome Music Lab. Common Sense Media is on there, and so is inspire.in.gov. Okay, and I'm not going to spend any time at all on this, but this is also just some ideas for kids that are non-computer related. So you have that as well. Okay, so moving on, I'm not going to spend very much time at all on online schools. I'm not an expert, which is probably how your parents are going to feel, but I definitely want to touch base on them just to get you thinking about them as options. Some helpful things to think about. So just like in all of your reference interviews, if a parent wants help finding an online school, I wouldn't get in the habit of making an endorsement for any one school. There are several out there, and it's really going to be up to the parents to do the research for their family and decide what's going to work best for them. But that being said, you want to be aware that there are public options that require no tuition, and they're essentially free to the parents. And there are tuition-based options that are essentially private schools, which, would not be free to the parents. And there are also options that provide more of a supplemental approach, offering individual courses. Those are usually for high school students. And those might be really helpful to parents who are considering more of a hybrid online school / traditional homeschooling approach. At any rate, be sure to encourage the parents to do the research about all of their choices. Here is a list of a few online schools that operate in Indiana as of August in 2020 that I found by Googling online school options in Indiana. So you can Google that as well. And again, this is not a list of endorsements by any means. I just wanted you to have a list to refer to and take a look at. I also want to draw your attention to the Indiana School Choice Guide by School Choice Week. That's this last link on the slide. They provide a pretty succinct outline of school choice in Indiana, including online school options. So those are just some options for you. Challenges for these families are going to be pretty similar to those remote learners that we talked about already. They're going to need a schedule and a routine. They're going to need devices. They're going to need good connectivity. When the school day is over, they will need social opportunities. They'll need spaces to work in. So all these things that we talked about earlier, all the ways that we talked about libraries helping, those would apply here too. Okay, so that's kind of the end of my stuff. So at this time, I'm going to go ahead and turn things over to Shelby, and she's going to talk about traditional homeschooling and all the things that libraries can do to help out with that.
All right, thanks, Suzanne. So before I really dive into this, I want to remind all of you that there is a lot of overlap here. All of the challenges and possible opportunities that Suzanne just talked about can also apply to a traditional homeschooling family, because many combine traditional home and online schooling depending on the various ages and needs of the students. And it's also common to see families that might have one or two homeschool children in the traditional sense, but have another child enrolled in the brick and mortar school just because that's what best suits the needs of that particular child. So I'm not going to repeat anything that Suzanne has already covered for just the sake of time, and focus on a few things that can be unique to the traditional homeschooler. So first, we need to get a good grasp on Indiana homeschooling laws. And this is pretty important. It's quite simple, and because of that, it's important for families to understand it, so that way they know if they're ever being told to do something that actually legally can't be enforced. That way they can get legal assistance if they need it. There are only two things that a parent needs to do if they are withdrawing a student from school. First, they need to inform the school in writing that they are withdrawing, so that way there isn't any confusion with truancy later when their kids stop showing up to school. If their kids aren't currently enrolled in school, then they don't need to tell anyone. Second, they need to keep attendance records to show that they held school for 180 days a year, and it doesn't have to follow the traditional school calendar. It just has to be 180 total days. And that's it. They can start homeschooling immediately. The state also says that the education should be roughly equivalent to what students in public school are learning, but there are no guidelines or restrictions on curriculum. The Department of Education has a homeschool page on their website that you can check out, where all of this information is available, but there are a couple things that are a little vague. So for instance, the website, there's a part on their website where parents can register their homeschool, but this is not required. The department only uses it as a way to collect data on how many families are homeschooling in the state, but this is an elective process. You're not required to do it. So if a parent comes up to you and says that they're trying to withdraw from school and the administration is telling them that they won't be allowed to withdraw unless they register and provide the school with the registration number, or that they have to send their curriculum choices to the school for approval, if this family is earnestly trying to traditionally homeschool and not do remote learning or anything with the school system, the school legally can't make them jump through any of those extra hoops. So this is when you would want to refer the family to either the Indiana Association of Home Educators or the Homeschool Legal Defense Association, so that the family can get proper assistance that they need. So this is why that it's important earlier when we differentiated homeschooling from remote learning and online school, because from a legal standpoint, they are not the same, even though education is happening at home in all three cases. It just boils down to who is responsible for providing the education to the child. So in legal terms, homeschooling is when the parent is responsible for providing the education, whereas with remote learning or online schooling, it's technically not homeschooling because an institution is providing the education. So I hope that makes sense for all of you. Now I'm going to briefly talk a little bit about a few common philosophies of homeschooling, and I'm not going to go over all of them in large detail, but these are good words for you to know for keyword searching, or if you want to read up on these later and help you search for books and resources in your collection and kind of help you understand when you get reference questions from homeschool parents if they're throwing in some of these words that you kind of know what they're talking about. And there's a good article that explains these really well that is going to be shared with you at the end of our presentation, along with a book list. So no worries, you will be walking away today with title names that you can look and check to see if you have them in your collection. Montessori and Waldorf probably might be familiar to some of you because they are also popular in the early childcare world, and they are also popular for homeschoolers as well. But I want to highlight the Charlotte Mason approach because it focuses on educating the whole child, and it's unique because it's big into the concept of using what they call living books. So this is roughly primary sources. So like autobiographies and journals written by actual people who lived in history instead of reading secondhand accounts and textbooks. A big part of their philosophy is that it makes more sense to learn about history through people who lived it. Traditional is what most people probably associate with homeschooling, which is where you have a classroom set up inside the home with a structured curriculum and schedule, which is literally a school at home approach. Unschooling is a more child-led approach. So the belief is that learning is natural for children and it's more meaningful when they're the ones leading the way at their pace and the parent acts as more of a facilitator than a teacher. Project or unit-based is a little similar to this. It's popular with families that have kids that are of a variety of age ranges, because since it's a topic-led approach, everyone can be learning about the same thing at the same time, but the activities can be scaffolded so that way it's appropriate for, so the older kids are doing things that are more appropriate for their age versus the younger kids are going to be doing more tactile or sensory activities, but everyone's learning about the same topic together. And many families choose their curriculum and homeschool style, again, based on the individual needs of each child or whatever benefits the entire family, and they can change it up or combine a variety of different methods as much as they want. And that is one of the strongest selling points for homeschooling right now, is being able to have that complete 100% customization factor. So moving on, I'm going to share with you the top resources for traditional homeschoolers, in particular in the state of Indiana. So if you are crafting a handout or a resource page on your website, links to these organizations I would strongly recommend, along with anything else that you might know as a local resource for your area. We already know that the Department of Education has the Indiana laws on homeschooling, but there are some homeschool parents who are interested in where they can find the Indiana state standards so they can make sure that their kids are learning what their peers are. The Indiana Association for Home Educators is the largest homeschool organization in the state, and they are important because they advocate for homeschoolers at the Indiana State House to make sure that the homeschool voice is heard when laws regarding education are being proposed and voted on. They have a plethora of resources for Indiana homeschoolers, and they have district representatives all over Indiana. So I highly encourage you to go to their website and find out who the representative for your region is, so that you can provide their contact information to your local homeschoolers. The Homeschool Legal Defense Association, like I mentioned earlier, they are a national organization that serve homeschoolers who need legal assistance. So if a homeschool family tells you that they are facing discrimination for being homeschooled, so for example, if a teen is being denied an opportunity that they're qualified for because they're homeschooled, such as a job or college admission, then definitely show them, definitely refer them to HSLDA or the Indiana Association of Home Educators, and they will be able to help them out. The National Black Home Educators and the African American Homeschool Moms both provide resources and support and community for not only African American homeschoolers, but all races. National Black Home Educators in particular is a national organization with a ton of great information, and they host their own events and have a lot to look at, so definitely check them out. Co-ops are a great way for parents to get support from other families who share similar values. Through collaboration, families work together to help teach their students certain subjects, especially some of the more difficult ones where you might need a little bit more of a person with a lot more expertise to really convey the information, like with high school subjects. There are a lot of co-ops out there, and it's a huge challenge for a new homeschooling family to find them. So being able to help match people up with some of the co-ops in your community would be a really great way to help homeschoolers find a support system through other homeschool families like them. So IAG does know of some, so your district representative might have some information on co-ops. And there are a couple of large co-ops that do have websites, and there are some secular groups as well that have like at least blogs that you should be able to find pretty readily online in your area that have events. But most co-ops have private Facebook groups. So that makes it extremely difficult for a newcomer to get involved. So one other thing I wanted to mention is that you should definitely check with your local museums and businesses. Museums in particular often provide classes for homeschoolers, so definitely do some digging to find out where in your community are opportunities for homeschool families, especially during the pandemic. I know, for example, the Children's Museum in Indianapolis just converted all of their homeschool classes to a virtual format, so they're still available and being offered. And last but not least, the library. Don't forget to toot your own horn and show off your stuff and everything you can do to help support your families. Yep, go ahead, Suzanne. All right, so I am going to talk about a few challenges that are more for a new homeschooling parent or for a veteran homeschooler that just moved from a different state and is just trying to figure out the homeschooling scene in your area. The challenges that Suzanne talked about earlier also apply here, so definitely still keep those in mind. But it's really not surprising that choosing to take on educating your children on your own is a very overwhelming decision. It adds a lot to the workload, and these families may have a lot of insecurity, but their conviction is there. Also keep in mind that these parents, like one of them might have quit their job to start homeschooling or are trying to work while homeschooling. So there's a lot of stress and anxiety that can come from that. And on top of that, Indiana does have little to no guidance on this, which is on one hand great. A lot of homeschool families in this state love Indiana because they have so much more freedom over their kids' education as opposed to some restrictions that other states have. But it also means that there's a multitude of decisions that they can make on curriculum and structure, and there's no real way to help them narrow it down. And again, the co-ops and local support are all on Facebook. So if you don't know that ahead of time, it's going to be extremely difficult finding that local homeschool community. And it's definitely a big problem in Indianapolis. And from speaking to some other librarians in other systems, they also experience the same problem where the co-ops are just really difficult to locate. So what we can do is help connect them with their community and also help them organize their choices a little bit. So that way it's a little less overwhelming. So the first thing to do is possibly just give them a little pep talk and offer them some reassurance that they're not alone. Trial and error is completely normal, and encourage them to do their research. And also, if when this pandemic is over or for some other reason they decide homeschooling isn't the right fit for their family, that's not a sign of failure. That's just a sign that they're taking charge of their child's education and are thinking about what's best for the child and their family. And that's really the only thing that matters. If you're letting patrons in your building, you can share a handout with them, just a one-pager with links to some state and local resources, as well as provide a list of your databases and library tools that you know you can offer them. You could also create a book list or display with some titles that might help break down some of those different philosophies I mentioned earlier. Just being able to physically show a parent just how much good information is out there and how much easier you're making it for them to access is going to be something that is going to be really reassuring for a stressed out parent. So if I would also recommend that you make sure you have an online way to access all of this information. So instead of a book display, maybe do a blog post instead with a book list of helpful titles, or having a Pinterest board of organizational tips, or just a clearly labeled page on your website that says homeschool resources. Maybe you make a LibGuide, something like that, just to make sure that you're providing as much access as possible for your families. The biggest challenge, of course, is connecting families with the community, and that was a lot easier for me to do before the pandemic because I did that through programming. But you may be able to do this virtually as well, or create some type of parent networking event, because one of the best ways for the family to find the co-ops and find the community is through word of mouth from other homeschool parents. So if you can't do a big event, maybe you could introduce a newcomer homeschooler to one of your veteran regulars that you know about if you've got permission from both parties to make that kind of connection. Okay. So here's a checklist of things you can walk away from today and start doing. And the best part is that you don't need a budget to do these things, since I know budgets are a huge challenge right now for libraries. We should always be keeping up with our homeschool districts, but make sure we are doing it more often. Look up who your IAHG district representative is and make sure you have your info handy, and even contact them so that way you can establish a relationship with them. You never know, they might be your regular patrons in your branch. See if you can locate the co-ops. Like, again, this is a challenge. I know for me, it probably took me a solid year to even find a couple co-ops that were just down the street from my library. But bring it up in conversation with your veteran homeschoolers. Ask them, you know, hey, are you guys involved in a co-op? Are you going virtual right now because of the pandemic? Is it all right if who can I introduce a new homeschooling family to if they're interested in getting involved with your organization? That's a great way to start. And again, like Suzanne said earlier, make sure you are aware with what accommodations and your library system can make for homeschoolers regarding your policies, and make sure that they are up to date. And I've talked about some of these other things on here already. I will say conversation is one of the easiest things you can do with your homeschool families to see what services they need. Your veteran homeschoolers will tell you point blank exactly what they want, and it's very helpful to at least know what challenges that they're facing. Whether or not you're able to directly help with them or not is another thing, but it does help you keep those needs in mind and give you an opportunity to possibly evaluate some things further with perhaps a survey if you're looking to do a program. Okay. And then other possible services that your library can offer. I've talked about a couple of these already. I do want to say that library databases are one of the most useful things that a lot of people don't really know about, or they forget all the time that they're there and just how useful they are. So I am always referring people to not only IndyPL's databases, but Inspire as well, which I know makes Suzanne happy. You can also, interlibrary loan might be a really good way to help get a homeschool patron connected with a book that they need. Like if they're Charlotte Mason, some of the stuff that they might want to read might possibly be out of print. So make sure that they know that interlibrary loan is a service that's available to them. Curriculum and education collections kind of go together here. This could be a book display with books that you already have in your collection. But if you do want to curate a special collection for homeschooling, you could certainly do that if you have the capacity and the budget to do so. One suggestion I might have if you're looking to curate a collection that has curriculum in it, you could start off by asking for donations first. You may have some veteran homeschoolers who are now retired and have a lot of old stuff that they use that they can donate. And that can help you get started with something that's pretty well-rounded with a variety of different ages and grades. Because curriculum is expensive, and some publishers are a little weird about letting libraries have latest editions and things like that. The sources I have for you at the end also include lists of popular curriculum publishers, so you can certainly check those out as well and see if that be something you'd be interested in adding to your collection. So it doesn't hurt to ask around and see if getting some curriculum donated might be a possibility. The last thing I'm going to note on here is that there's virtual programming, which I'm about to talk a little bit more in depth about. So I'm going to share with you today about what NDPL has been up to, kind of the programs that we've done before the pandemic, and how the pandemic is changing up what we're doing. So we have a homeschool collection, and we've had it for a few years now. It started when we got a very large donation from a retired homeschool family that had about 200-ish items. And now over time, it has grown to 900 items in the collection. And it was still curated largely by donations. We did purchase some or pulled some books that we already had in our collection and just recataloged them for the homeschool collection. And it is non-floating, and it lives in our downtown library, and the items can be sent to any of our other branches. It has the same checkout time as other materials, so curriculum can't be checked out for an entire semester. It's just not feasible for us to do that. And it has circulated really well over the years, so we're really happy with how that initiative has turned out. But we are looking to the future, and COVID-19, like everyone else, the pandemic has wreaked havoc on our purchasing budget, but we still want to make sure that we're making it easier for patrons to access our homeschool materials, and we also want to make it more equitable. That is the one downside to getting donations, is that you don't have too much say in what you're getting. And now that we have such a good foundation with the big collection downtown, we're really trying to look for purchasing books that are diverse and representative for a lot more homeschooling styles. So we are writing proposals to hopefully get the funding we need for that. And these smaller collections will be a bit more philosophy focused as opposed to curriculum. Okay, so programs that we've done. People sometimes ask me why would we create a program just for homeschoolers? Because as a kids program, pretty much the exact content can be helpful or enjoyed by anybody, not just homeschoolers. And my response to them is that it has to have homeschool in the title for the networking reasons I've said before, because that way parents know for a fact that other homeschoolers are going to be attending the program. So if you're new to homeschooling, new to the area, and you can't find anything online that promises other homeschoolers will be there, that just makes finding the community that much harder. So after hearing that feedback from some of the new families I was getting in my branch, I started Homeschool Explorers. Another branch also had a similar program, and I kind of catty-cornered off that a little bit so that way they'd be similar. And it was a very successful program. I usually had 25 to 30 average attendees, but could have up to 60 in a given session. So it was very, very loud, but a lot of fun. And this was, again, I had conversations for months about parents asking for a program and an opportunity to network with parents. And even though I created it with kids in mind, it really ended up doing so much more for the parents because of all that networking it provided, since it was like one or two things in Indianapolis that is for homeschoolers that isn't exclusively advertised on Facebook. So it was much easier for families to find. Other than that, it was a STEAM program, and there was some other stuff thrown in because I wanted to kind of align it similar to the project or topic-based homeschool philosophy that homeschool families are familiar with. So every session I had the parents and children submit suggestions for things that they wanted to learn more about. So that's how medieval times and stop motion animation and even hosting our own book discussion from time to time really came in. I tried to have at least a third of the sessions be kid or parent request, and it worked out really well. I also was able to partner with a chemist from time to time who would do some science experiments with real lab equipment that everyone really enjoyed. And I also implemented an email list so I could keep my regular families up to date on what we had been doing for what we're going to be doing for the next session. And as of now, it's not coming back in a virtual format for a couple reasons. My program was at the Lawrence branch for NDPL, and I now work at a different one. So I've transitioned. And in addition, NDPL is a really large system. And with how we are currently doing virtual programs, we have to go through a number of departments to actually get something online. And we also kind of have to share our Zoom accounts and web space with a lot more staff. So it's a lot more collaboration with my buddies from the other branches, which we really like each other. So it's been going really well, but it's just a different process. And so I'm still thinking a lot about this program and figuring out, do I need to tweak the format a little bit to make it work better online? Or maybe just because there are other STEAM programs that NDPL is currently doing that perhaps maybe I bring this back when we're in person again and we focus on other initiatives, which our homeschool committee has been working really hard to keep putting on homeschool programs during this time. We're just focusing a little more on the parents right now. And I think for the pandemic, this is a really good direction because it also is inclusive for our remote and virtual learners. And it helps us make sure that we're sharing resources in as many outlets as possible to make them accessible. And hopefully we can still help parents network with one another in this way. So we have a few virtual programs lined up, and we're hoping to do one monthly. Last month, Suzanne presented about Inspire through Zoom, and we had about 20 or so attendees for that. It went really well, got very good feedback from it. And in a couple weeks, we are going to have the Indiana Association for Home Educators do a Homeschool 101 session with us. And also we have our district representatives will be attending as well so that they can introduce themselves to the program attendees and share their contact information. And we have a few more to be determined presentations lined up with African American homeschool moms, as well as having some our digital technology librarian specialists come in to talk about our our virtual resources and sharing those with families. So if you'd like to do something similar, I'd suggest figuring out, I'm sure at this point you already know how virtual programs have to work for you. I've seen and heard from all the great ideas that a lot of other folks have had with virtual programming, and it was definitely very inspiring to hear about some of the stuff that other folks have done. So just make sure that you're aware of how to do that with your own branch. And reach out to potential partners. See if you can invite someone to come speak or share knowledge or have an opportunity to connect with families. And as well, if you're doing homeschool services in the past, we've often, just surveyed patrons just to see maybe they really need a collection and not interested in a program, or vice versa, or they need both. So just finding out that information. And then lastly, do you have the staff capacity you need, and how much would it cost to put on the program idea that you have? And I really just want to emphasize that we need to be kind to ourselves too right now. I know Suzanne and I are giving you a lot of information today, but I just don't want you all to feel pressured to do everything. Just take some of the ideas that you like and that you're able to do safely and with minimal stress, and that's okay. You don't have to do everything that we're throwing at you, because I know it's a lot. I will be sharing with you, there should be a link with this webinar that includes the homeschool reference binder that the homeschool committee made that we have sent to all of our branches. And it just contains, this could be something that's a good reference for you if you want to create something similar for yourself. And it just has links to the national and statewide resources, local Indianapolis contacts, a bibliography for books on starting to homeschool, homeschool methods, and various high school resources. It's got a lot of good stuff in there. And the nice thing about having it as a PDF is that, you know, if we're talking to a family in person, we can just print out the relevant pages that they want and hand it off to them. We are also, I wish I had something to share with you, but these things that we're working on just aren't finished yet. But we are generating a LibGuide for our website to highlight educational databases and resources by age level. And it will probably be labeled homeschooling, but it would benefit anybody who's doing learning at home. And we're also going to be carving out, I think, some more dedicated space on our website for homeschool resources, especially through our blog. But like I said, that's all work in progress. I wanted to talk a little bit about our homeschool information fair. This was like our huge project that we worked on for a couple of years, and last year we were finally able to host it. And we would like to host another one late in 2021, but who knows with the pandemic. We're working on a backup plan if we can't host it in person. So we're requesting, hopefully getting funding for that. We had a vendor information fair was the big bulk of the day. So we invited community partners and organizations that offered homeschool services from all over the area in one place for to share their services and opportunities for homeschool families. We had Guy Hansen, who, if you are not familiar with him, he is a retired scientist from Lilly, and he does these phenomenal science shows where he blows a lot of stuff up and the kids love it. For kids, so he was like our big keynote event for the day. And we also had a book sale going on where any curriculum that wasn't in the collection or other educational materials that we had from other donations, we sold in the book sale. And we also had information sessions, kind of like a conference. And while those that attended the sessions got a lot out of it, the majority of the families were mostly just interested in the vendor fair. So going into next year, we're hoping to just stick to the vendors and maybe have a really cool keynote like Guy Hansen again. But to do this virtually, we're not really sure how to do a vendor fair virtually, but we could probably use some of our resources to get some speakers in for a couple of virtual talks and maybe some breakout networking sessions that could highlight some vendors. It's still in kind of the brainstorming bubble right now for the homeschool committee, but we're hoping to have some type of event that reflects the homeschool info fair for next year. So the last thing I want to talk to you guys about today, and then we're going to wrap things up, is outreach relationships. Many of us do story times at daycares and schools before the pandemic, and we might have visited classrooms to introduce databases or things like that. And co-ops are another opportunity for this. You could do it virtually through Zoom during the pandemic if the co-op if that's their preference to do something virtual, or if that's what your library policy is right now, if you're not going in person anywhere. If you're doing like a database tutorial, it'll be a little less hands-on if you're doing it through Zoom, but you could still do some Q&A and present the information to them. But this was a really nice way to connect with homeschool families, was being able to connect with the co-ops and share library resources with them. And I'm not telling you to buy this card game, but Search and Destroy is a great way to get kids engaged with databases. And it's a card game that was designed by librarians. And it is a very cutthroat competitive game where the kids have to continuously make searches using different search techniques in databases. And once you hit 0 results, you're out. So there's a lot of like cards that will mess with other players to try to really condense their results. So it's a lot of fun. So if you're working with any kids in general and showing them databases, that's a really fun thing to look at. I'm trying not to endorse it, but had to share. The state library is also really great to partner with. I've worked with Suzanne a lot this past year, and she's awesome. Along with all the other folks at the state library, there's plenty of resources there that you can share with homeschoolers. And we also partnered with WFYI, which in Indianapolis, that's our PBS station. We've worked with them for our homeschool fair because they have curriculum. They have PBS curriculum, especially on Eva Kor and the Holocaust, which some of you might be already familiar with, but they have a lot of educational tech as well. So if kiddos need a brain break, PBS Kids has a lot of educational games on their website. So they're a great partner as well. So consider reaching out. So those are just some last minute lingering ideas for you.
Okay, so that was a ton of information. I just wanted to mention 2 things really quickly. The state library is actually putting together a virtual field trip for schools, and this would be something that would be really interesting for homeschool families as well. So if you're, any of the virtual programming that you're doing for your traditional families would also work for folks that are homeschooling. And I really can't wait for our virtual field trip to be done so that we can share it with homeschoolers as well. And I also wanted to mention, Shelby, Indiana Educators, or the Indiana Home Educators Network, that's faith-based, is that right?
Yes, they are. Like
Okay.
they're still, they're still significant because of what they do with the State House, but there are secular organizations out there.
Absolutely. I just always like to throw that out. So with that, our contact information is there. And if you guys have any questions about anything that we shared today, you guys can feel free to reach out to us. And I'm going to turn things back over to Beth Yates.
Thank you. I just want to say thank you to Suzanne and Shelby for presenting this for us. I really appreciate it. There was so much good info. I love that you cover both students who are schooling at home and homeschooling. And I wanted to mention one more time that all of the resources that they have mentioned that they will provide, we will link those in the Indiana State Library's archived webinar page where this webinar is posted. So it'll probably be the webinar, you'll see it in a box on that screen, and then either above or right below is where you'll find all those links. So, and then one more time, the LEU, you will have someone in your administration or HR create an LEU certificate for you if you are in an Indiana library. So that's all I have. Thank you one more time to Shelby and Suzanne. I really appreciated it. And thank you all for watching. Bye.